Go on.
As far as I can remember, my first experiences may have been when I was in first grade and I liked a girl and I was kind of shy and uncomfortable about approaching her because I just felt like I wasn't really quote-unquote normal. And since then, obviously a whole lot of experiences have happened. Pretty much when people ask me this question, I would say they're surprised to find out that I've almost everything that can happen to somebody. In general terms, has happened. I've lost friends um, from people I've just met who are friendly and then discover that I'm queer, get all weird. To people who have been close to me, and I decide to share that part of myself. To family members who have basically banned me from speaking to my younger cousin, for example. I also was in student housing, and most one of the most impactful experiences I've had was when I was in a student housing, an hospedaje, and I had strong feelings for one of my roommates, who was my friend, and I think she wasn't really sure, or whatever was going on in her mind. But essentially my other roommates kept prodding me because they did know that I was queer, and they kept prodding me whether I liked her, and I kept trying to avoid the subject. And then finally when I did say I liked her, things got a little weird. And then next thing you know, that girl and my other roommates had me basically quarantined in my room and talking to me, and her screaming at me and myself crying, and it was very intense, because it was a very clear moment of lesbo biphobia, because had I been talking about a guy or even a friend or a brother of theirs, it never would have been handled in that way. It was basically consciously or unconsciously some queer phobia, and most of them after the fact did apologize, but it was very intense. And I also ended up getting kicked out of that student housing because one of the roommates, who was not really friendly with anybody, ratted the situation to the landlord, and she basically made my life miserable and wouldn't renew my contract and basically threw us all out. So that was an experience. I've also had issues with work, which one of the problems with, even in places where there are laws that say you can be protected if you're found to be discrimination for gender or orientation, is that it's very hard to prove what was the motive. And many times what happens, like in my case, they basically just don't renew your contract, or they just say we don't need you anymore, or they cut your hours and do a lot of different things, and they don't really tell you why. But you can kind of sense of what's going on there. Yeah, I've basically experienced a lot of different things in that arena, and I think that's one of the reasons why I working towards changing that, because a lot of it is based on ignorance and people not being desensitized or being unfamiliar with people, because you might say, oh yeah, gay people, but do they really have close friends who are? It's a very rare thing. So it's also kind of confusing as people say, oh yeah, and then you start to know them. And that's why I kind of have this ground rules I've developed for myself, which is that if I meet somebody new, most people think I'm straight, or they don't know, but they don't necessarily assume things. And what I do is I kind of be friends with them, and then after a certain amount of time, I basically tell them if they don't already know, because it's just better that way, so I don't get involved and feel, that we're friends and develop a relationship, only to find out that they're just going to start being awkward and weird and end up being disappointed. So that's pretty much generally how I feel about the subject.